back to the channel. If you are new here, my name's Tatum, and this is my first ever bookstagram? No. Booktube? I think it's Booktube video. So I started reading a lot last year. One of my 2020 New Year's resolutions was to read 12 books. Thanks to quarantine, I read 29. I read 29 books last year. So I just kind of wanted to give you guys a worst to best review of the books. So if you were considering reading any of these books and you see it at the bottom of my list, maybe you won't read it. And if you were considering reading one of the books that I have at the top of the list, then stick around to the end of this video. I rate books on a scale of 1 to 3, obviously 1 being not the best. Just because a book is a 1 does not mean that it's like really bad. I just personally didn't have interest in it. I love books that have romance or are thrillers, there's a murder, just really interesting books. I don't like historical fiction. I'm not really into self-help books. I've started to like celebrity memoirs this year, but I'm just not really into books that are super realistic unless it's about a celebrity's life that I actually follow. And I don't know, I guess you'll see from this, the books that I read, kind of what my genre is. Let's get right into it. All right, so starting with book, and I need my list here because there are just so many of them. Starting with my worst book of the year, All the Bright Places by Jennifer Niven. This book, it's really depressing. It's about people who really don't want to be on this earth anymore, and they kind of find each other and help each other through that terrible experience, I guess. So that's number 29. Moving on to number 28, we have The Women in Black, Madeline by Madeline St. John. I honestly just found this book really boring. I feel like honestly nothing happened. Like, I read it pretty quickly because it is a really thin book, but I feel like by the time I was done reading it, nothing had changed from the start to the finish. So then next up to 27, I already donated this book because I was not a fan and my mom and sister didn't want to read it after I told them my review of it, but it's Normal People. Now, this book was extremely popular this year. One of my best friends from college loved this book. It actually became, I think it's a Hulu series, which I actually did like the Hulu show, but the book, Normal People, I just felt like the main character enjoyed abusive relationships, and the guy she was with part of the time, like, he wasn't into that. Moving on to Next Level Basic, which is 26 by Stassi Schroeder. I love Stassi. Stassi just had a baby. She was on Vanderpump Rules. Great show. Love it. Love her husband, Beau. The book just wasn't... I thought it was going to be more of a celebrity memoir, kind of about her life, and there were little tidbits about her life, but I'd say a majority of it was about like embracing your basicness, and just if you want to be basic and post a selfie, do it. And I just kind of wasn't into it, I guess. So that was that. Number 25, we have Little Fires Everywhere by Celeste. NG. I don't know how to say her last name. This book, I think I'm still in the 1 stars. Yeah, still in the 1 stars. Everyone loved this book, and I thought it was a good book, but then I watched the TV series and it made me dislike both of them. So 1 star, I would still suggest reading this book, even though I did give it 1 star. I felt like it was kind of slow until the middle, and then it kind of picked up a little bit. But basically the premise of the book is there's a family, and the book starts with their house burning down, and then it kind of works backwards. I guess that's a flash forward, and then it goes back to real time and moves through kind of how they get to that point. So then I think we're on to 24. Yeah, 24, Little Beach Street Bakery by Jenny Colgan. I picked up this book because I loved the cover. If you know me, I love to bake. I love bakeries. I want to own a bakery someday when I'm retired. And I was really excited to read it. So the premise of the story is this woman who, I don't know if she gets a divorce or if she breaks up with her boyfriend, but basically her relationship ends and she needs to basically like move out. But basically she goes to a small town. She starts over in this really shoddy cabin basically, and then she starts her own bakery. It kind of starts small. She just makes bread for her friends, but then everyone's like, holy cow, this bread is really good and unique. So she starts working with the actual bakery in town. It becomes really successful, and then that woman retires, so then it's hers. I guess, spoiler alert, I just told you the ending. I don't think you were gonna read it anyway, but yeah, it was fine. It was fine. Moving on to 23, we have Girl Wash Your Face by Rachel Hollis. Now, if you know anything about Rachel Hollis, apparently, so she has this book. I think she has another book after this one and then another one after that one. But basically her book talks about the small things you can do to kind of have a better life. And I guess people don't really like Rachel Hollis because she talks about having a better marriage. And then I guess this year she got a divorce. Moving on to Daisy Jones and the Six, which is book number 22 by Taylor Jenkins Reid. I enjoyed this book. I liked how it was written. Basically, it was dialogue between the characters of a band, and basically Daisy Jones was this crazy woman out there on her own singing, and then she kind of joins the Six, and it's about her and the lead singer kind of having a thing, but he's with someone else and he has a baby with someone else, and there's like this weird tension, and he's a recovering, I don't know if it's alcoholic or drug addict. I don't know. I read this like 6 months ago. But I enjoyed it. It just wasn't really my genre. I don't really enjoy reading about bands. That's not really my thing. But I do think it was a good book, and I liked the way it was written. And I also enjoyed the ending. I'm not going to spoil this one for you like I did Little Beach Street Bakery, but I did like how it all tied in together. Next up, number 21, we have The Bookish Life of Nina Hill by Abbi Waxman. So this book is about a woman who, I don't think she owns the bookstore, but she works at a bookstore. She runs a few different book clubs, and she just kind of has her life set up in the way she goes about it. She has a cat, and she talks to her cat, and she just is kind of doing her thing, and then all of a sudden her life gets turned upside down. It turns out her father left her a bunch of money, and she didn't even know who her father was. So it's just kind of about being an only child and then kind of going into this family. And yeah, I liked it. 2 stars. Number 20, I Have Something She's Not Telling Us. I picked this book for my book club. It's by Darcey Bell, and this one was actually pretty crazy. So it's about this family of 3. So there's a mother, a husband, and their daughter. She's really young and she has asthma. So basically, they are just living their beautiful, perfect life in their apartment. They're in a city. I don't remember what city, but the wife owns a flower shop. She's becoming really successful. She's doing the flower arrangements for really famous parties, really exciting. Life is going great. And then her brother kind of dates questionable people. So he dates this woman who seems to have it all together. She shows up at their door for dinner with these wonderful buns that she claimed that her grandmother made, and she seems to have it all together. They go on this vacation to Mexico, and things start happening, and she is not what she seems at all, and it's really dramatic up until the end. So I really enjoyed this book. 2 stars. I definitely recommend. For 19, which is Finding Freedom. I don't have it with me. I think my sister's reading it. So Finding Freedom is about the story of Meghan and Harry and the royal family. So it's not written by them. It's written by 2 women who are kind of on the in with the royal family. Obviously, they're not a part of the royal family, because if you're in the royal family, you can't write a tell-all book. So I did enjoy reading about it. Good book, 2 stars. Then up to The Proposal, which is book number 18. So The Proposal is about, it starts out at a baseball game. This woman, Nicole, is there with her boyfriend. He proposes to her, and basically she says no and runs away. So while she's running away, this guy catches up to her and basically helps her get out of the stadium, and then it's just kind of about their relationship from there. On to number 17, I have The Turn of the Key by Ruth Ware. I read this in October for my book club, and it's about this nanny who goes to this family. Their mansion is kind of far off the beaten path, and there's this like creepy poison garden in the background, in the backyard, and it's just kind of about her taking care of the family in this mansion. And it's a smart house, so she doesn't really understand how to work everything, and then creepy things start happening, and she doesn't know if there are ghosts. She doesn't know if it's like one of the people in the house doing it. So it's just kind of about all this weird stuff happening. And the book is actually written from her perspective. She's writing letters to a lawyer because she's in jail for murder, and she's trying to convince the lawyer to take her case. So she's basically explaining what happened. So really interesting. And the book ends with kind of interpret it your own way. I mean, you know what happens by the end of the book, but it leaves you on a cliffhanger of like what happens then. So I really enjoyed this book. Definitely, if you're into thrillers, murder mystery, definitely recommend. Moving on to number 16, which is 50 Shades Freed. I read the 50 Shades of Grey series last year just because everyone had read it when I was younger, and when I was younger, I didn't want to read it. So last year I was like, you know what, quarantine, let's read this. So I did. I enjoyed the series. I'd say that one was my least favorite, but overall the series was good. You'll see the other 2 coming up in the 3-star sections. The last 2-star book is Humble Pie. So funny story, I was visiting my boyfriend in St. Louis, and we were at the airport. It was time for me to go back home. And he told me that if I didn't cry, he would buy me a book from the bookstore. So he bought me Humble Pie, which is a book about basically math mistakes and what they led to. And if you're not into math, I wouldn't suggest reading it, but as a super math-minded person, I absolutely loved it. I thought it was very, very interesting. Moving on, so now we're finally in the 3 stars. So if you were considering reading any of the books that I'm about to talk about, obviously I recommend 3 stars, which to me means just a fantastic book, had me interested the whole time, really into. So book number 14, The Guest List by Lucy Foley, suggested by Reese's Book Club. Reese's Book Club suggests all the best books, so if it's ever in Reese's Book Club, I definitely suggest reading. So The Guest List is about this wedding that takes place on an island that no one else is on, and basically someone gets murdered. So the book is all about the wedding and leading up to it and who are the guests, and it's from all of their perspectives. So each chapter is about someone else's life, and each chapter really convinced me like a different person murdered the person. But really good book. Again, if you're into murder mystery thriller, I definitely suggest. I'm actually going to read another Lucy Foley book in 2021, so I definitely suggest this one. Book number 13, Ghosted. This was actually the first book that I read in 2020. My sister didn't like it as much. She was like, Tatum, that book was boring. But to me, I really liked it. It's by Rosie Walsh. Basically, it's about this couple who only spends 7 days together. So they meet, they spend these fantastic 7 days together. Everything is wonderful. Then he goes off on vacation and says, you know, I'll call you when I get to the airport, and he never calls. So that's why it's called Ghosted. On to book number 12 is 50 Shades Darker, and 11 is 50 Shades of Grey. I already spoke about the series. Good books. If you're into it, great, read it. If not, don't. Do your thing. Moving on to book number 10, we have In 5 Years. I also read this for my book club by Rebecca Serrell. I really should figure out how to say these names. So basically, this book is about this woman who basically has a flash forward about what's going to happen in her life 5 years from now. So she goes to bed as she normally would, and then she wakes up and she was like, holy cow, I think I was just in my life 5 years from now and I was in bed with someone else in a different apartment. Like, what? Moving on to number 9, we have Catcher by Kaylin Nicholson. No one but one of my best friends from college is gonna know who this author is. She's a YouTuber that I fell in love with during quarantine. She wrote this book. She has 2 other books, but the one is like a poem book, and then the other is just kind of about like your feelings. So this is her novel, and it's going to be a part of a series. I really enjoyed it because it's all about this girl in this like fantasy world. So it's not realistic at all. So if you're the kind of person who needs a book to be like in real life, this book is not for you, but I really enjoyed it. To book number 8, Big Little Lies. If you haven't heard about it by now, it's basically there is a murder, and it's about all of these women at this school, and kind of they're talking to the police about, you know, oh, who did it, and it's kind of leading up to the murder in the end, and then you find out actually what happens, and there is a show based on it. So I actually watched the show before I read the book, which definitely ruined the book for me. Obviously, I still thought it was a great book because I gave it 3 stars, but if you're interested, I would read the book first, then watch the show. But really, really great. Moving on to number 7, we have All Your Perfects by Colleen Hoover. Colleen Hoover has written so many thrillers and romances, and this was actually my first Colleen Hoover book. This was another book that I read for my book club, and just, I think someone in my book club summed it up as 1 minute you're crying out of sadness and the next you're crying out of happiness. Like, the chapters just back and forth. Basically, one is in present, one is past, and it just kind of, it takes your emotions for a roller coaster. So if you're up for that, if you're down for that, I definitely recommend. I thought it was a really, really great book. Moving on to book number 6, Such a Fun Age by Kylie Reid. Did I have another book by Kylie Reid? No, that was a different read. Another Reese's book club book, so I definitely recommend. It was very, very thought-provoking, I'd say. So basically, there's this couple, and they have 2 daughters, and they have this woman who works for them, and basically the woman who works for them is African American, and she wears this specific shirt when she works for them. Now, it played out that way because she was wearing like a nice sweater the first day, and then the woman who hired her was like, oh, just wear one of these t-shirts, which was one of her, like, she owns a company, so it was one of her company shirts, and she just kind of wore that from then on. But then she starts dating this African-American guy who had actually dated the woman that she works for. So he is kind of like, oh, that woman is obsessed with African-American people, and the fact that she is making you wear this shirt is, you know, she's trying to put you down. And it was, especially in the climate of 2020 with Black Lives Matter movement, I would say this was definitely a really educational read, just because you're getting both perspectives, and it was very, very thought-provoking. So I suggest you read it for yourself and form your own opinion, but really fantastic book. Moving on to book number 5, Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes. I don't have it with me because I gave it to my sister, but she didn't actually finish it. So I don't know, actually, maybe we donated it. I don't know, I don't have it with me, but if you read the Hunger Games trilogy, I definitely suggest this book. Basically, it's from President Snow's perspective, and basically his childhood leading up to how he becomes the person he is. And it's crazy because when you start the book, you're like, oh, President Snow, he's this terrible person, like he must have been a demon child. But actually, or at least I, when I was reading the book, just felt I understood everything he was doing, but then he starts to make these decisions that are questionable. And you kind of think, and you're like, would I have made that decision? Maybe not, but was he trying to be a bad person? Most of the times, no. And basically just like leading up to his downfall in the end of not being a good person. And it was really interesting to see how the Hunger Games evolved. Obviously, it wasn't always this huge event, and just kind of seeing how different it was in the beginning to how it is in the Hunger Games trilogy was so, so interesting. I also really liked seeing the same last names from the Hunger Games trilogy in the Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes. I thought it was a fantastic read. It was really long, but I would say push through because it was worth it. Really, really great book. Moving on now to number 4 by Jodi Picoult. We have Small Great Things. This book was crazy. So it's about this African-American nurse who is in, I believe it's the maternity ward. She helps people give birth to babies, and basically this white couple has a baby and they don't want her helping with the baby. They don't want her to touch the baby because she's African American. So basically her supervisor says to her, hey, you're not allowed to help them. Don't touch the baby. Don't get near them. We're going to put someone else on their case, basically. So they put another nurse in charge of them, and then the African-American nurse is in with all the babies, just kind of watching over them, and then the new nurse who is assigned to that couple says to her, hey, I'm gonna go like take someone into the delivery room. I just need you to watch over these babies. So she leaves, and the African-American nurse is there watching all the babies, and she notices that couple's baby turn blue, and she kind of pauses for a second, and she's like, I'm not allowed to touch this baby. What do I do? So I definitely suggest this book. It's basically about what happens from then on, and I really, really suggest this was a fantastic book. Jodi Picoult is a wonderful author, so really, really suggest. Moving on to book number 3, we have The Silent Patient by Alex Michaelides. I don't know how to say that. The Silent Patient. I'm sure you've heard of this book if you are into reading. It's basically about this therapist who goes to, I guess it's a psych ward, but he kind of wants to hear about this woman who hasn't spoken since she killed her husband. and he thinks he can get to the bottom of it and basically get her to speak and tell what happened, but you will not see what happens coming. Like, as soon as everything starts to shake out in the last 100 pages, you'll like put it together, but I was just shocked. It was fantastic. Definitely suggest. My second favorite book of the year is American Royals. Fantastic book. I chose it for my book club to read, and basically it's about if America hadn't ever elected a president, if basically we were run by a king, and just such a good book. If you're into like young adult romance novels, that's basically what this is. Really fantastic. And I guess this isn't a spoiler. This is just, I guess, like a PSA. I don't know. It's a series. I actually just read Majesty in 2021. So I guess if I do another one of these booktube recap things, you'll hear about it. But that was also a great book. So American Royals, 100% recommend. Really great. My mom's actually reading it right now. Leading up to my number one book of 2020, the best book I read last year was Open Book by Jessica Simpson. One of my best friends from college is probably laughing right now because I actually gave it to her after my mom and sister read it as well. And she's reading it right now and she literally cannot get through it. But to me, this was the best book I read all year. I flew through it. It was actually a really thick book. But Open Book is basically Jessica Simpson's memoir, and it's all about her life from being a baby to where she is now. Basically, everyone she dated, the things she went through. And I wasn't a big Jessica Simpson fan before. I mean, I wasn't a hater. I didn't know anything about her. Obviously, I knew her name. I kind of knew a little bit of her story, but I didn't know that much. And I fell in love with her reading that book. Just, if you're into celebrities and gossip and memoirs, just definitely read this book. It was amazing. Really it wasn't the first book that I read last year, but it really did kick off me reading all of these other books, but it was fantastic. So definitely read. So that is it for my 2020 books. For 2021, I hope to read 12 more. So off to a good start, but thank you for watching. I hope you read any of these books. If you read any of them already, leave a comment below what you thought, if you agreed with me, if you disagreed with me, and thanks for watching.